Imagine for a moment that you are on an airplane and you're flying down the runway. You're expecting that it's going to take off and you're going to get to your destination just as you planned. This is your manifestation. But what you don't know is that before you actually really take off or get to that destination, you are going to crash and have a horrible experience where you may or may not make it out alive. The universe redirects you. And from the position of awareness and consciousness, of being forcibly redirected, shoved into a different airliner, or maybe your flight gets canceled at the airport and you get delayed, so you never even get on that runway. There are many ways that this can play out, but this is the universe having your back. But when we are hyperfixated on our goals and our position of consciousness and awareness, and being that there's only one way to get there and one time frame to get there, these moments can be very, very upsetting because we don't understand. We don't get it. All we feel is a sense, if you struggle with this, and not everybody does, it's a part of spiritual maturation. Most people, at some point before they really understand this concept, get extremely bent out of shape. I remember many years ago watching a story on Instagram of somebody that I used to follow who was trying to do a visa run. We met internationally on our travels. And she was trying to go to a particular country in Latin America and ended up having multiple delays and was very, very upset about the whole experience. But it was something like 12 hours later where she posted an update and something miraculous had happened. She had been redirected and things ended up working out even better than she ever thought that they could. But what was fascinating is that for those 12 hours, she was really beside herself and posted very intimate photos of her being very upset and even crying, and very vulnerable and courageous for sharing her personal experience. But when it worked out, it kind of made everything feel like, wow. Not that it wasn't for nothing, but these emotional experiences that we have, myself included, because I've seen myself go through these emotional, turbulent waters, only to retrospectively be like, oh, wait a second. There was really nothing to be that upset about, actually, except my mindset was so driven and so focused on my original plan that when I didn't see that things were going to work out and I didn't have faith or confidence in my ability to manifest or that the universe had my back, sometimes those were very white knuckle, harrowing moments because I didn't understand why everything was blowing up in my face or why I was being redirected. And it was a beautiful mirror for me to see myself through her lens and also to see other people's emotional states when they are at earlier points of the spiritual maturation process. And similarly, I recently had a dream, actually, that I'd like to share with you. It's not long. It's very symbolic, but I was driving. I was a passenger, but I was in a car with somebody who I had a serious relationship with in my past. And I left them, and that was the right decision but on paper, it didn't make a lot of sense. It was an intuitive feeling. And they were driving the car, and there was this awareness that as we were flying off of the cliff to our demise, there was this awareness that the life path with them was headed towards a mutual destruction and death. I don't know if it would have been a physical death, but it was a dead end. And I was in the passenger seat preparing for death, and they were resisting it because they weren't yet awake. And I left to go and awaken myself. And I felt this discrepancy in our energy and our awareness and our consciousness. And they were freaking out. I should have been freaking out in my dream because it was very real. It felt very real. But instead, I was like, well, this was a dead end. Well, okay. It's kind of like a, choose your own adventure book. If you ever experimented with one of those, you're kind of disappointed, but at the same time, you're like, okay, well, this is it. I guess that's it. And that's how I felt about it. But they were clinging on to the construct of life and really fighting it and resisting it. And then there was this supra awareness that I made the right decision because I couldn't see it at that time, but it was actually a dead end. And there was something about that awareness and the dream that gave me a sense of peace that I didn't know I was missing. The universe has a funny way of forcibly closing doors, sometimes even aggressively in our face, or strangely when we reach out to people in the past. There's nothing. There's nothing there. It's like you go to phone a friend who you haven't talked to in a while, and there's nothing that comes back. You wonder, did they change their number? I had this happen recently with a family member where I was texting some random person with the number that I had for a family member who never changed phone numbers that I was aware of. And it wasn't until I got this random person on the phone that I realized, oh, they actually don't exist at this number anymore. It was really bizarre. And so on the Ascension journey, what you'll find is that people will suddenly be non-existent in your reality. In that particular case, there was a second number. I don't even know where I got the second number. This was a person that only had one cell phone, I think, in their entire lives. Older generation, older, like boomer, super older boomer. Those people never changed their phone numbers. But apparently this family member did. And I had both of their numbers, which is also very odd, very, very strange. So what happens is that the universe has a funny way of closing out cycles and people and access points. And it's not just to people, sometimes it's to jobs and opportunities, but it is our resistance to these fluctuations and our persistence to go in directions that are dead ends, that the universe is trying to guide us away from. And that resistance and persistence is a major cause of suffering that is sometimes completely unnecessary. Because when you see what's on the other side, you see that everything was to your benefit. But when you're going through it and you're attached to the outcome, you're attached to the how, you're attached to the when, You're attached to that person, even though they may not be right for you, but you're attached to the fantasy surrounding it in your mind. Then what can happen is this emotional template can be brought up there. Mine. It has supposed to be. This was my job. This was my vision. This was, you see how it's all centered on this idea that you're trying to bring into fruition. This manifestation that starts as a fantasy. And we get so fixated at times that that is the only path forward. Why do we get so fixated on that? Because it's the only runway that we see. So we think that's the only way it must happen. Because when we come from linear, binary, human constructs of societies, we have a hard time with divergent thinking sometimes. And so when we learn that the red light always means red and the green light always means green, there are no deviations. Similarly, when we learn that we're supposed to take off from runway AE in the Syracuse airport to go to Tampa, then there's no way that we're going to Tampa unless it's through Syracuse. Maybe the runway is going to change, but of course not. We know logically that there are other airports and other paths and detours and other runways, but we still get hyper-focused on there being one when it comes to our manifestation process, as if there's only one airport, one runway, one airplane, one departure city. And it's ludicrous, actually, when you look at it that way. Because this silly example of air travel is actually infinitely complex, but we get so tied in our manifestations to there just being one path that it creates emotional disturbances in us, which can be profound. Some people actually want to harm themselves when things aren't working out, or harm other people. Isn't that crazy? It's insane when you think about it. It's absolutely mind-blowing. There are actually those that would take from your grandmother and figure out another way. There are actually those that would physically destruct property or another person, because the only way that they perceive a path forward is through destruction and harm or taking from somebody else. It is so bizarre. It is. It's really, really bizarre when you consider all of the multitude of ways that they could manifest and solve problems. But because they're so fixated on that thought loop, and there being no other way because all of the other ways that they've learned aren't working out, instead of learning new paths, they fall into this web of, well, I guess the only thing that's left to do is to go rob a bank. Like, what? Where do we go? How do we get from there to there? But some people's minds do that. And some people actually, it's really strange, but they will actually fixate on other people's belongings with envy and jealousy and greed, as though they themselves don't have the capacity to have the same. But they get stuck in these ways of thinking that are dead-end traps anyway, that the universe might be trying to shake them out of. Like, for example, trading time for money. That is a hamster wheel that ultimately is very limited and its construct. And so sometimes when the universe is trying to shift you out of that, you could be facing difficulties financially because the universe is wanting you to expand your notion of how to support yourself. And not just support yourself, but to be abundant in the world. And similarly, if your only concept of making money is through a 9-to-5 job that is low wage, low respect, with very limited growth potential, and the universe knows that there are infinite ways to make money doing what you love, working less for more, all you have to do is to be open to that possibility existing and let the universe help you navigate there. But when you hang on to that dead end, low paying wage job as a wage slave and you fight tooth and nail, then at some point the universe is going to, the universe is not going to give up on you, but I would. I would actually just be like, okay, they want to stay at the wage zoo. Okay, I'm going to walk away and let them stay there. The universe, I think, has infinite patience. And so will still help you and nudge you along your way. But some of those lessons are going to be very tough and very challenging. But if you're not up for the ride and the universe is trying to shift you into another airplane, but you're hell-bent on crashing into the wall, then your free will can be used to crash, or it can be used to actually see that there's another path. And if you would loosen your grip on the one singular way or method or the how or the person, like a lot of people get caught up in prolonging breakups because they don't see a life outside of the partner that they're with. And this really, they struggle with it. And some people actually go to the grave with said partner miserable and really, really deeply, deeply upset because their soul feels like they missed an important destiny line. Because sometimes they have, not all the time, but sometimes. And so when we get caught in this rigidity of thinking patterns and we stay harnessed and tethered to lifelines that are ultimately leading us to dead ends, we struggle with the universe's attempt to shake us out of our complacency, when all we need to do is to realize that maybe there's a better path forward.